Okay, John Dougherty.
Yes, John Dougherty.
Okay, thanks a lot. We're just going to have
Sure.
a bit of a chat here about voice dialogue and maybe how you came across it and how you use it in your life or your job.
Right. I'm a physician, a neurologist by training,
Okay.
and so in my area of expertise is Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
So it's not directly related to voice dialogue or the psychology of the selves, but I got interested in it because my wife, who is a psychologist, gave me the book, The Inner Critic, by Helen Sidra Stone.
All right.
And I read that book, and it just spoke to me. It was very powerful for me to read the book because it was about, I found that after reading the book, I had as well a very, very strong inner critic. And so I told my wife that I wanted more experience with the people who wrote the book. And so for my 50th birthday, she gave me a present. She came with me. And we flew from Tennessee, where I'm from, to Mendocino, and I had a session with Hal Stone. And I also rode my bike down the coast of North Carolina, and my wife followed behind me. And we had a great trip. But the experience with Hal Stone was a profound one for me.
Right.
The Hal and Sidra Stone are the developers of, I guess you would say, of voice dialogue and the psychology of the selves. And I found that a very, important, enlightening experience. So we've come back every year since then, and now it's almost 17 years. So.
Wow. And here we are sitting in the Stones' house.
Here we are. We're in the Stones' house. In more ways than one.
In more ways than one. What exactly was it that caught you when you did the work with Hal? That first thing, what made you say, "Wow, this is"?
Yeah, well, I think he facilitated the inner critic in me. Okay. And by facilitate, he spoke with that person, that self. Okay. That individual self, and in many ways, it was an enlightening experience. I mean, I had not experienced the energy of the inner critic before. Right. And that turned out to be a starting point, so that I, got more and more interested in the field and read the books, material, and videotapes, and so forth.
I guess since then you've met other selves, other parts of you.
I have,
a few hundred or so.
Yeah, right. And the rational mind is another very powerful self.
Well, I guess as a professor, you're going to have a rational mind, aren't you?
Yes, it's a good thing to have.
It's great,
now and
absolutely.
then if you're doing, scientific research.
Okay.
And, but other selves as well, and then the possibility to integrate them in a way such that out of it comes this certain structure. Yeah. Which makes it easy to understand the selves and to kind of categorize them, so to speak, and to have a sense of their energy and power. Right. And then bring that together in a constellation so that there is another process or a process that goes with the psychology of the selves itself that centers around the concept of the aware ego. Right. And that's an individual, or maybe not a self classically, but it's a cohesive structure that allows one to separate from the individual cells.
So what's, I think, being called the executive function of the psyche kind of thing. It's the choice maker, or the place that is between these different selves that gets to choose and select.
And it has awareness but no judgment.
Right, okay. Now, one of my particular interests in talking to you is that as someone in the whole area of neuroscience, I've read some stuff around the multiplicity and there being circuitry in the brain that actually might correspond to these different cells or parts or energies, whatever we want to call them.
Well, I think it's pretty much identified where the self is, that is the self-recognizing, and these are usually identified as the medial bifrontal structures in the front part, executive of the brain, but the ones that are closest to the center, medial structures. Right. And it's in that track in which one in the abstract sense, I guess, one's self resides.
sense of self.
One sense of self, of course. I mean, for example, if you show someone a sweater that's not theirs, you don't get activity in this area. They see a sweater that is their own sweater, and suddenly they get activity in this self part of the brain that identifies itself as a self. My own view, I'm not so sure that in the abstract sense that we can identify individual selves in the brain, because it's a very complex process, and some of them may have more of the emotional brain, some of them may have more of the rational brain, and so it would be a distributed system. It's a kind of buzzword, perhaps, but still the idea of self, and there's certain areas of the brain like the anterior cingulate cortex, which is right in the middle, which we think is very important in executive decision making, and so the self can tap into that area in the aware ego process.
That's because you've written about that.
I have, yes.
That might be the case, that the aware ego, as we've talked about it, will be located.
Yeah, we took as a substrate individuals with Alzheimer's disease who have a condition called anosognosia. It's a fancy word, but in short, what it means is that they don't recognize themselves as they can't recognize themselves in an accurate way. Their role, and you ask them, do they have a memory problem, and they say, no, I don't, and of course they may have a very profound memory problem. They don't see themselves in a realistic light. And we did some studies on those patients and identified this anterior cingulate cortex as it seemed to be the area that if it's involved, one doesn't have this correct interpretation of themselves. And we extrapolate that possibly to the psychology of the selves. It's an early idea, and a lot of work needs to be done.
But you're like pioneering that kind of work?
Well, pioneering, other people are involved, as well, but there's a number of researchers that are interested in that area.
Yeah, because I'm reading books that kind of, I think I showed you one the other day, Incognito, where he's talking about different patterns of behavior being burnt or hardwired, but burnt in rather than hardwired. Well, they can become hardwired, I guess, once they're burnt in.
Yeah, but the brain's very flexible. And one thing we've learned, is that it can actually generate new cells as time passes. So it's not. Yes, there are areas and there's aspects of the brain that are so-called hardwired. But it's a flexible system too, and it can grow. Even in, it used to be said that you didn't produce any neurons in the brain after childhood, but that's clearly wrong. And there are neurons that can grow, and plasticity that can occur even as one grows into old age. By plasticity, I mean certain areas of the brain can take over activity in which they used to have a different function.
Would this then mean, in terms of the psychology of selves, that as one could develop a new self, or would that correlate to that, or is that?
Yes, or even as one. Yes, I think that's a very reasonable, if not likely, proposition. But maybe even more important is that one could put together a constellation. Maybe you touch in one voice dialogue session just a little bit of the rational mind. You might work on this idea of rational mind, and actually develop either growth of cells, new cells, or plasticity around that process itself. I mean, we do that in meditation in a certain, abstract way. We build a certain cognitive state in meditation. There's been a lot of neuroimaging studies, some of it instigated by the Dalai Lama, believe it or not.
I heard
and he's worked with an individual at University of Wisconsin-Madison extensively, and looking at changes in brain function in meditation, and they're clearly reliable changes.
Has it been done, or would it be interesting to do if someone has neural imaging when they access a different self? I mean,
it would be, but it's not an easy problem. And the problem is that if your mind wandered just a little bit or whatever, it's controlling it could be a difficult thing. But there's ways to get around that. But it might not be just as easy as the layperson would think. Because it has to do with issues of control, by scientific control. I don't mean control that one manifests sort of thing, but generating controls which are reliable. And it may be in each individual person, say the rational mind, which is a general concept and it can be identified in most of it, might have a different structure in, each individual might be a little bit different.
Right. It's certainly a fascinating area.
Absolutely.
Where would you see the future of this leading? I mean, if you think of voice dialogue and you think of this work and research that's going on in neuroscience, where would you see?
Well, I think probably imaging, as you suggested, is going to be a very important step. Now there's ways not only to image in a static sense, like you were saying, being in the rational mind and imaging, one could do that, but also one can image a ongoing process now, and it's called diffusion tensor imaging, and one can actually see a neuronal sequence being taken up in different areas of the brain, and you can measure it time-wise in milliseconds how this might concept, let's just say the concept of the rational mind, but one could trace its development within the brain itself.
As the dispersed nature of it through the brain, you mean?
Exactly, yes.
Wow. That's fascinating, John. Well, I think there's a lot more we could talk about, but this is just a short conversation with you, and I'd like to thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, and I think you're doing a wonderful job in trying to put this together for so we can expand knowledge and participation by other individuals in the voice dialogue process itself.
Online being the internet being like the global brain almost.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.